Okay.
Kick this off?
Sure. So, all right, so welcome back. For this last section, we're going to be doing a panel of experienced business people for different walks of life. And so we have a couple of questions that will maybe generate some conversation and thought. So we're not really sure where the topic's going to take us. So we're just going to jump right in and get started. As kind of a warm-up question, we talked a lot about getting people excited about governance and getting them excited specifically almost at the ground level so that we can develop governments from the ground up. So here's a question to kind of kick off the conversation. Have you ever had an experience where you were able to get people excited about volunteering or getting involved? And what were some of the things you did to make that successful?
Anybody else?
You've been involved in governance?
Sure, if you got that, or anything.
If you join the committee, you might actually see the change that you've been asking for the last 6 months.
I can actually talk on this for a little bit, but I won't. I'm on a local school board, and I have been for the last 12 years. I'm getting ready to enter my 5th term. So there's a lot to getting people actually involved. And one of the main things we've been able to do to get level of involvement increased dramatically, and I think it actually does carry over into this, is that by showing people the impact and the value that it can have, and not just on them, but on their coworkers, or in the case of the school district, on their families and on their friends and their friends' families, if you can begin to show the value and the ability to free somebody up to actually do productive work and add value instead of sitting in meetings like we discussed earlier today, or fighting through other people's problems that were created by others. There's a lot of, it is a long process. If you were thinking about it in terms of sales, it is a long sale to show somebody to get somebody convinced that this is going to be of value to them. But once you do, and if you can do that, then they get invested pretty heavily.
In our company, as we introduced Java and Confluence, given our company's history, we've been notorious with bringing products in, just standing them up and saying, okay, start using them, folks. So we tried a different approach with Java, and we had a forum called Java and Jira. Java and Jira. And so we had coffee, breakfast provided for folks. Whomever wanted to come could come, and people turned out in droves, believe it or not. And they got excited about not only that we had this product coming and they were understanding what the product was about, but the fact that we showed them the road of how we had made an investment in finding out how the various teams were doing business and how we were trying to base the customization of Jira up on this platform, on this standard of basically their input. So we showed them that we were looking for their input and how good this was going to be for them. At the end of this, we had multiple folks coming up volunteering, saying, what can I do to help? And much of it was governance-wise. It was, what can I help to set the standard, and so on and so forth. So it was that excitement, but also showing them, we're investing in you and letting you actually participate. So that was our experience.
So right now I'm running a customer engagement survey, and the customer engagement survey is the people that use the tools that I provide, and as part of that is a roadmap, and the roadmap says, we're really good at administering the tools, but we don't know all the cases that you possibly use it for, and so as part of that is allowing people to provide the feedback that says, what do you need? And so I had one of our senior leaders yesterday stick his hand up and said, do you have a committee that I can join? Because I want to be part of that roadmap. And so being open to the fact that you might not have all the answers and you need the input from people in the business who know that better than I do is probably one way that you'll get people to volunteer. If you say that we're not going to make any changes and this is how it's going to be, then why would you sign up to be on the committee if you know that there will be no changes enacted? So that's the way that I do it.
So although I'm at Atlassian now, where Confluence is taken as just de facto norm, I've been in 2 prior companies where I was the Confluence champion. And the most powerful thing that I found to drive engagement, at least with that, was just modeling what you can do. And the ability in Confluence to just copy and paste and then, like modify from there makes that an incredibly empowering way to just let people get involved. So that's what's worked for me.
Good. Anyone else? Comments?
Pass you over, so.
Yeah, I want to introduce one of my experience when I work for a company. We have a huge instance of Jira, and instead of putting this top down to enforce this governance, we set up some internal AUG. It's kind of a way to use this grassroots methodology to attract people to participate in the discussion and to show their concern. It's a very relaxed atmosphere. It's a bring your own lunch event, and when people have an idea, we can just to select some people as a volunteer to focus on different area. We have a monthly meetup. It's an internal company meetup. We just under the AOG's name, but it's a really good methodology to spread this the Atlassian culture inside the company.
Great. All right, guys. So since you all answered that question so well, I'm going to take you to a harder question. So we just had Ian give us a great presentation on some of the history of Atlassian and Atlassian products. So let's combine that presentation with the conversation we've had all day talking about governance. So considering both of those, is there something that you would like to see Atlassian do in the future that maybe could support governance, or maybe even improvements or changes to current systems, or maybe even a product in the future that would be a great product for governance?
I think Brian wants it.
No, there's just a lot of admin related things on the back end that make it hard to. I mean, obviously a lot of add-ons have gone through the process of making this work, but there's just simple things to make it easier to go through all of the configuration pages, to find things that are unused, to find things that could be cleaned up. Sort of a self-cleaning feature. I believe some of that's coming out on Data Center though, which is great when you're on Data Center. So yeah, more stuff like that to help the administrators just do their jobs, I think would be great. I mean, obviously it's really great already. I do my living out of this, but yeah, that would be nice. I don't mean to point at you, Ian. I'm not sure why I'm talking straight at you.
I'm waiting for
Take
Ian's
this back
answer.
home.
I'm excited to hear what Ian's going to say.
No, I'll come back in a second on performance and thoughts.
From the feature-wise, because Atlassian tools is starting from very agile, small. When we talk about scale up, instead of go to the data center, I want to see instead of a centralized, I want to see how they can do the federation. Means the feature can do the governance across multiple Jira instances. So that will give us a lot of flexibility, and also the money-wise, the plugin scenario, we can benefit from that.
Yeah, that's good.
Well, so maybe mine is less of a wish and maybe more of what are we doing or thinking in this space. At least on the cloud side, one of the things you'll see is that the next gen projects are much more self-contained, which enables a lot more delegation of governance. So you can push down a lot more decisions about workflows and custom fields with a lot less of the overhead that those things bring to one big instance. I love the idea of federation. I think that's an important direction to go in. And like from my perspective, dealing with some of Atlassian's biggest customers, one that's almost unavoidable. So yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. Any other wishes?
Any other thoughts? Yeah. Now's the time to get them out.
So going back to something that I saw develop back in the networking world as it was emerging, and yes, I'm dating myself, but in those days, the network management platforms kind of, we had some of the same problems. You had no way to manage your network across at any type of scale, and things like what became VLANs and VLAN tagging and all that kind of stuff. That was a those were things that you couldn't even do until some certain foundations were put in place. And I think we're seeing some of that in what we're talking about in organizations that have 50, 60 instances. There needs to be a way to bring some consistency across those. But as partners, we have to do some major hacking and some major work inside the databases and some major data munging just to make that even possible. So, somehow, and I think some of that effort is starting to happen, but bringing some order to that chaos, it's not a problem that is new. It's one that's been solved before in other industries. And it just would be really good to see Atlassian as an organization be able to pick that up and really take it to the next level. Any rebuttal from the Atlassian guy? Okay.
Speaking for the entire company.
Great.
We have no trouble putting you on the spot, Ian. None at all.
That's right. All right. So thoughts and ideas that we talked about in governance today are actually broader thoughts and ideas than maybe just Atlassian. How could companies replicate the ideas and structures and successes of Atlassian governance into other non-Atlassian activities, maybe even processes like Agile or other products like Microsoft, Google, et cetera?
Who's going first all the time?
Oh, I'm sorry. No, actually, it's really cool because with a lot of our clients, they wind up looking at these models and go, "Oh, that's great. We're going to use that for all of our IT right now," and they wind up creating either the same committee or this happens over and over again, where they wind up taking this model and just running it through their entire company, at least for product control. So, it maps very easily, I think, to that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and you guys lived through an experience where a customer not only took the governance model out beyond into other IT realms, they've kind of begun to take it across the entire governance of a regulated organization.
Mm-hmm.
So all governance practices through the system, and Jira and Confluence absolutely work for that. So another wish might be, hey, what about some tooling that would make it really obvious that this combination can work almost at a very high level in some of these areas.
Generic committee management.
Jira committee.
Maybe some almost back to the previous question, some some platforms or reports that could actually be like governance-based reports.
Anybody else have thoughts on that one before we move on to the next one?
Ideas.
No, I'll take a quick. I think if I kind of think along those lines of using Jira and or reusing instances of Confluence and Jira in this way, then it means having some kind of portability of the configurations. And I think there are some marketplace apps like Botron that help people kind of pluck out Jira configuration and put it down somewhere else. With Confluence, you have templates. And I think those become some of the mechanisms by which you can transfer those practices across organizational boundaries and kind of pass them around. So maybe that's what you guys should build and put into the marketplace, is some of those things.
Way to sling it back.
Yeah.
Yeah, nicely done. Okay, so one more question here from me. I'll say this is kind of the fun question. Does anybody have any horror stories or of control or governance of a process that maybe went really wrong, where maybe something like governance could have helped, maybe something like the Atlassian tools or something else? So when you experienced that, what were you able to do to work through that crisis? And was there an improvement in a process on the back end of it? And was that able to maybe produce some future success?
So I can recall coming across a Jira instance with 180,000 users, had 180 projects, it was all 18s, and 180 admins. And I remember seeing this and thinking, wow, that's going to be a big job. And essentially, the only reason it was there was that the quality process was broken, because across all of those products, there was no single status that showed whether it had been through QA. And so QA had asked help. And when I looked at it, my only advice was burn it to the ground. So the amount of labour that's going to be involved to do this, to get to where you want to be, is not a small amount. We owe, it's pretty much cut your losses and just move it. And I remember saying that, and someone said, "You can't say that." I was like, "Well, it's the honest truth. Like, at some point, you have to just talk straight, and that's how it's going to be." And they did do that. They did start again, but it was knowing that it was too far gone. Governance came in too late, and so if your company needs to continue to deliver product, and the amount of time it's going to take to get there, we're not going to see the benefits. So, stand up that new instance, migrate the teams, whether you use configuration, who knows, but sometimes you do have to just cut the losses and move on. And I've got one at the moment where we're considering the federated approach. Federated approach doesn't save us any money. We end up buying on the license, but you've got to think, okay, the thousands of people are going to move, and things are going to do. This is going to cause a lot of disruption while I do this, and so the federation might be the best worst option, right? It's going to be terrible, and we might need to build a platform that allows us to search across instances. But given the size, that's what we're going to do. But this is a problem that Atlassian hasn't solved, right? Federation's been talking about it for a while. Again, best worst option.
Burn it to the ground.
Yeah, are there burn stories?
It's hard to tell someone's baby they're ugly, and then But I mean, that takes a lot of guts.
There's we had to help a customer in New York navigate a pretty difficult situation. They had a very large instance, and it set up a number of scripts that would automatically create issues. And they had an offshore team that triggered the script on a looped basis for a whole weekend. And so they came back, and they had an incredible level of corruption. But what we were able to work through there was, yes, we had to create an app because you don't want to go through even bulk edit at that point in time would only get you 1,000 at a time, and when you're dealing with millions of issues that need to get deleted, it's a much bigger problem. So we solved that programmatically. I mean, that wasn't even that hard. But the main thing was to actually get some ideas in place that, yes, automation makes sense, and the governance aspect of it was, here's where automation makes sense, here's where it doesn't, here's how you put some safeguards around it, and how you make it something that won't cause you to have to burn your instance to the ground. Because if you think about some of the issues that could have been created there, and if it hadn't been caught, then there would have been, there was another situation, actually it was another company in New York, that where they had a script kind of burning through creating issues, and they didn't know it. And so they had some projects that had blown up, and they actually had to end up burning it to the ground and starting over, just because everything was so corrupted and intermingled with legitimate data and fake. How do you sort it out? So anyway, anything else?
I've got not a horror story, but a success story where, just working with teams who were all working in their own silos. Each person had their own project. Each person was tracking their own work, and nobody was looking at it centralized. And so obviously that comes with its own huge problems. And so by working with individual team members one-on-one, which is kind of the method I talked about before, we actually wound up getting everybody into the same project, and that team wound up just humming along incredibly smoothly. And the best part was there was a control case right along next to them that didn't do that, and they had then continued to just slam into each other over and over again. So it was really, really nice to see the Jira tools work along with the softer skills to make everybody come together around their work.
I got one more.
A lot of horror stories. All right.
All right, so I've worked with Confluence since version 2.5.3, and way back then I made one design decision that has been really expensive ever since. And you mentioned about the different governance boards before, but the one that was missing is an information architecture steering board to make sure that the right infrastructure decisions you're making are long-term good decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And the company I worked at that time, we only had 2 database services. It was Oracle or SQL Server. I was just better friends with the Oracle guy than the Microsoft guy. No other reason than that. And so when I installed that version of Confluence, I got into creating an Oracle database instead of a SQL Server database. Seemed okay at the time. But that Confluence is 2006, and it's grown so big now that it can't be moved. And so it's the only enterprise service that's on Oracle. All right? And everything else is on SQL Server. They can't move it. And so the licensing impact, single cost of that decision, because I didn't have a review of my decisions at the time, and Stash, Bitbucket, all the others are all running under SQL Server except Confluence. And so anything that needs to be custom written has to be done on the Oracle side. And when I left that company a few years ago, and we still joke about this one decision, I was like, yep, that was a bad one to make. But it's the importance of having someone else peer review the decisions. Didn't seem like a big decision at the time. You know, if I got it early enough, I probably could have done an export and then reloaded and we would have been happy. But it is just too big now.
Other eyes on.
Yeah.
Other eyes on.
And it was purely just, you know, over instant messaging server, I just messaged, can you create me the schema over in Oracle? Done. Off we went. And maybe it's cost $1 million since then, maybe 7 million. Who knows? Like the license cost alone is far outweighs the peer reviewer could have had. And they said, why don't you just go get it on SQL Server, because that's where we're doing all of our other enterprise apps.
Yeah. Great story. Anybody else? All right. So those are the initial questions I had. So what kind of questions or comments do you guys have for each other?
I have a question that would love to get the answer to. I know I helped put on this event and I learned some things today. What are your takeaways and what are you going to do differently because of the stuff we talked about today? Any big takeaways?
That's the hard question of the day.
Be practical. I'll start since everybody's thinking real hard there all of a sudden. I just put you on the spot. But, you know, I'm thinking about something that Ian had said to me when we were talking on the side, and that is, you know, the issue of governance is very important no matter whether you're dealing with Atlassian or, like I mentioned earlier, you're dealing with a school district. I mean, governance is an issue. Or you're dealing with the U.S. Congress, which is a whole nother issue. But when you're dealing with governance, you've got things that are in common across many different areas of our lives because it involves people. They need to be governed. But then there's also the types of issues that come about at different levels of scale. Just like a family with 2 kids has many different issues than a family with 7. You know, a family with 7 kids, their level of structure has to be much more defined in order to even function. So it's just like that here. We have customers that they might be a high-tech organization and they may have a bunch of different systems, but there's only 50 people. And then they're on the other end of the spectrum. We get a call and a request to spin up a 10,000 user instance because we need to add a new group to the system. So that's on top of, I think, 51 or something. So when you start talking about that sort of scale, the issues of governance, while the processes and the principles are the same, the implications and the application are a little different. So that's something that I've been thinking about ever since you said that earlier. So I'm glad you were here even for that, just for that reason. But I'm looking forward to digging into that more clearly because we intuitively will go in and do that with somebody. We don't try to apply the same principles to somebody that has 100 people as somebody that has 10,000 people. But defining that is actually kind of an important concept. I answered my own question.
Yeah. One of my practical takeaway from my side is I think we need to set up this governance framework like this triangle. I think that's very important first to identify all the stakeholders within your organization who will be who will be the decision maker and who will be like, let's say the program manager or project manager will involve in the add-on review, because most of time is because to deploy a Atlassian product is a very vertical process from this server, the bare metal, install the OS. When you expose your server on internet, you need to talk up to the network guy, the security, and if any workflow change is a project manager. I think the first thing is to identify the different stakeholder and to write their name down and also their contact on your portal. Let everybody know who should be your first point of contact to talk when they have a problem. And also like this how-to article will help a lot of the admin to easy their life, because most of companies it's a single admin to manage the really vertical from workflow change, project level, server. They really manage a lot. But I think there are two parts can easy their life. First, to documentation, to the documentation about the how-to article, means the training part. Another is the automation, to try to use some plugin or different scripting to automate the process. Means that admin can focus on more important tasks.
I believe my takeaway from today is there was some really good advice on governance type structures today. And in our organization, we're actually switching over from 3 different kinds of products into Jira and Confluence. And so the conversation has been, okay, as we get more and more teams on the products, and then they have suggestions. What are we going to do with those suggestions? Are we just going to throw them at the administrator and then we just make changes randomly, or what type of structure? And so it's been widely agreed that we would have some type of structure, some type of framework in place for this type of governance. But this actually gave advice today, so we can actually take some of this today and utilize it. So it's been really productive. Appreciate it. Yeah.
So I have probably one piece of that governance model already in place. I've got 16 members on a committee that would run this through. I ran an upgrade in October, and there are varying degrees of comments from that committee. And probably what I'm taking away today is that 16-member committee can probably actually be broken down into groups who have a real high engagement and those who just want to be informed. And inside that group, there are people who are there because they started with the conversation of, I was the Jira admin at my previous company, and so they want to be involved. But they probably don't really want to be involved in the higher level strategic things that are going on. They want to know about the upgrade. They want to know about what test cases did you run, what scaling are you going to do. But yeah, probably breaking it down will probably end up with a better level of engagement. And there's 16 people, so I'm sure I can probably divide that at least 3 ways.
I saw something reflected here today that it's like it sounds different when somebody else says it, and it was that separation between application layer and system layer. And the question that I asked earlier was about and how is that different for cloud? Well, but in my head were so many customers who are of the, I think, mistaken belief that if they could just get to our SaaS, they don't have to worry about the system side. And so, there's, I think the practical thing for me is actually to remind them, no, you want these products connected to other things. That's going to be a system concern. It doesn't go away. You may, I think you said, it gets less. There's not hardware to manage, but it doesn't go away. And I think that's an important reminder for anybody running or trying to make the leap into cloud. That keep that in mind.
That's good.
Oh yeah, no. Going off of what Greg said, like something you can make a small decision that winds up costing eventually millions of dollars. Even a small decision such as naming something wrong in the beginning and then having to go re-explain it to people over and over again as they call you up and ask you for help. So just like when you go to make these configuration changes, having another set of eyes, having, let's say, another administrator with you to go, yeah, that way does make sense, or you know what, that's going to cause user confusion. We really need to go down the wrong path to make it as clear as possible that resolve all these questions later on. Save you a lot of time.
I'll add my 2 cents too. The one thing I learn every time I talk to somebody about governance is that it's much easier to talk about governance than it is to do governance. And so I learned a little bit more about that today too. Even if you could have a magic genie that could completely structure all of your information and documents and everything around governance, you would then have to come back and figure out how you can actually make that available to people where they could actually find it and use it and things like that. So actually the implementation is always harder than talking about it for sure. Very good. So anybody else have any other comments or questions before we kind of wrap up this last session for the day?
I've got one little thing maybe here at the end.
Hold on, so we've,
Okay.
all right, so evidently our,
Oh,
can we hand out, we need to hand around yours, this one evidently.
Okay, no problem.
okay.
We lost our handheld. Well, let's see here.
Hold on, there's a microphone.
Actually, would you mind kind of pulling
We'll
that up
edit
through?
this. No, Mike,
push
Steve,
it
you're
through.
okay. Steve, you're okay.
We're good?
Yeah, we're good.
Which way do you want to go?
He's got a mic
Now,
gun.
the mic on. Thanks.
I'm gonna. Plug it in where that one went.
Did you have any other questions? I'm good then.
No.
I mean,
No, it'll be the last one.
All right, somebody test that microphone.
Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10,
That's right.
11, 12, 13,
All right.
14.
Give it to Brad. Let's see.
We're live, Brian.
That is his life.
One thing that Steve was mentioning kind of triggered a thought. He mentioned, talking about governance up front, much easier, and getting on top of it in the beginning is much easier than later on. And I think that's been very apparent today. Another thing I've noticed, and I'm in quite a few Agile communities, user communities, outside of talking about tools, is I think there is something prevalent out there as well as we want to remind folks there's a difference in following good Agile practices and then using these tools versus it's how much governance we have around it. I think sometimes teams, even management, has this misnomer that it's the tool. We need to put more governance around the tool. It's all the tool's fault. But sometimes if you really kind of take a good look at it, it is just that. It's a company's investment in their teams, in their Agile practices with their teams, and actually in their backlog. So the backlog that's going into the tool and the best practices around that, such as very, very good backlog refinement practices, modeling stories up front, and then introducing them to collaborative teams so that you don't have duplicate stories or bad stories sitting in the tool. So this is just one little reminder that this kind of, Steve had triggered to me is there is definitely a difference in practicing, good Agile and then using the tool. And these are very powerful tools we're talking about today. So they're great tools. And then the governance, and you shouldn't get confused between the two, and I do see management companies and teams doing that from time to time. So just something
Good
to
comment.
put out there.
Okay, well, thanks to all of our panelists today for joining us and participating here. I think we had some good comments and good conversation. And thank you for everybody online for participating as well. And we will hope to see you sometime soon out in the world of Atlassian.